Nathan Bolt, Maya artist here at Emergent, and today I'm going to show you some of the basic workflows of the new Gamebryo Rapid Particle Iteration tool. So first off, we're here in Maya. I've got the Gamebryo particle shelf open. These first four buttons here are all going to affect your rapid particle viewer once you have that open, and these next four will all create a particle system. So we'll go ahead and click the first one of these to create a basic particle system, and let's go ahead and look in the outliner to see what this has actually done. It creates two nodes, the NI emitter node and the NI particle system node. And these are separate because you can have one emitter emit several different particle systems, or one particle system emitted from multiple emitters, which is why they're separate. So once we get that up, let's go ahead and put a material on here so we can see our particles as something besides black squares. It'll also create a default material for you when you create that. Let's go ahead and throw a texture on there. Let's take just a second. Alright, I've got a fire texture I'm going to use. Some other settings you want to be aware of when you're creating material specifically for this. Usually you want diffuse turned all the way down and your emittance turned all the way up. And you'll also want to override your default vertex colors and set those to emissive and emissive only, which the default material it creates for you should already be that way. Then to apply this, you just go through and select your particle system, not the emitter, and assign your material to that selection. So once we do that, we should have a particle system that we can at least see. So let me go ahead and make this a little bit smaller, and let's launch the remote viewer. This is your remote viewer launch window. And then in this box here is where you can set it if you want to preview on PlayStation 3 or Wii. If you're connected to a dev kit, you can do it through there. We're just on PC, so I'll launch it straight from here. Once you launches, it's going to export the scene out to the viewer. It'll take just a second before that shows up. And then we have our particle system. In the viewer, you'll notice a small icon over there in the bottom right-hand corner. Anytime you make a change, it's going to immediately port that change over to the remote viewer window. And while it's pushing that change across, you'll have your little hourglass sign there. So now that we've got that up and running, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the options we have on the emitter node. We'll just go through these real quickly. This first one is volume type. Right now I have this all just emitting from a point, but if you want these to emit from inside of a sphere, you can set that in there. If you want to emit from, we have box, cylinder, and torus, all as different volume emission types. After that, you can choose how you want it to emit. We have directional. Omni is going to emit it in every direction, or hemispherical. And then if you have it set to directional, which is probably the most common, you can also control the spread that they're going to be emitted along, with 0 being just emitting in a straight line, and 179 being almost a perfect hemispherical emitter. The direction they're emitted you can actually control in two places. You can set that in here, and these are going to be rotation inputs. So if we want to emit it to the side, we input 90, and those limit 90 degrees to the side. You can also set this on the transform node of the emitter itself. So if we put 90 in here, we'll get exactly the same thing. So this is useful also if you want to animate the emitter. You can do it over on its transform node. After that, we have our base rate parameters. This is how many particles are going to be emitted every second. So if we crank that up a little higher or put it down a little lower, it's going to emit fewer. You notice when we get up really high, you get kind of this stutter effect. That's because it's reaching the maximum number of particles, which is a setting set on the particle shape itself. So if we want to get rid of that, we can just up this number so that it can have 1,000 particles on the screen at the same time. And then we can change those settings in here. After that, we have some other parameters here, the particle lifespan, which is in seconds. So if we set that to 0.5, our particles will live for half a second. Variance, it's going to add and subtract whatever number you put in here. So if we put in 0.2, our particles are going to live between 0.3 seconds and 0.7 seconds. Particle size in units, if we set this number higher, they'll be bigger. Pull it down smaller, they'll be smaller. You also have a variance control on this, which is going to do the exact same thing. It's going to add and subtract this number from the particle size randomly as it creates a new particle. So if you pull that down a little smaller, we'll get the particles closer to each other in size. So let me go ahead and put that at 0.1, and I'll set this at 0.05. So we should end up with particles that are between 0.15 and 0.05. Speed is how fast the particles are going when they're first emitted. So if we pull this down to a negative number, they're going to emit in the opposite direction. If we put it up to 2, they're going to be moving twice as fast. Variance, again, does the exact same thing, just lets you control a range. And speed flip ratio This is going to be a number between 0 and 1 that's going to control how many particles are going to be emitted going in the opposite direction. So if we set this to 1, we'll have all our particles going in the opposite direction of emission. If we put it at 0.5, half of them are going to be emitted going up, half of them are going to be emitted going down in any ratio you want there. So I'll go ahead and set that to 0 for now, so all our particles are going the same way. And then finally in here we have our rotation controls. Random rotation speed sign. So these first two are speed and then rotation angle. Rotation angle is just how much it's going to rotate each particle on birth. So if we set this to like 30, every particle is going to come in slightly turned to the side. Variance, again like before, lets us set a range. So if we set rotation angle to 90 and rotation angle variance to 90, all our particles are going to come in somewhere between 0 and 180 degrees rotated. Speed is how many degrees it's going to rotate at every second. Variance lets you set a range. And then random rotation speed sign is going to rotate them in either direction that much. So if we set this to a number like 20, all our particles are going to be spinning at 20 degrees per second, speed variance, so that we get anywhere between 0 and 40. And if we set random, now they're going to be rotating in either direction. So those are some of the basic things you can do with the particles. Some of the other things I want to show you are when you first launch the particle window, you have a couple options in here. This one is going to pull up your remote viewer options. These first ones up here I'll show you in just a second because these relate specifically to animation in the scene. But if you want to view the UI of your rapid particle window, you can pull that up in here. It'll give you your frame rate, or we can go in and hide that. And also right now I've got default lights in the scene. But if you already have lights in your scene and you don't want to add default lights, you can uncheck that. This one will launch the remote viewer, as we already saw. This one will pause it or restart it. If you want to pause to make a whole bunch of changes at once and don't want to wait for it to update. And then finally you have refresh over here. All the options we've set in here so far are going to immediately update, but some things that can't immediately update because it's just too much information if you set keyframes, or specifically any changes you make with the material, because some of those could involve textures. And so if you do that, it's not going to put those over until you do a force refresh. So as a good example of that, I'm going to go ahead and change this from the default alpha it's using right now to an additive. We just change destination to 1, so it's going to add each particle's color on top of the next. And again, that's not going to show up until we do a refresh. So now it's adding each of those particles on top, and so you'll eventually end up with white. The other options I said were concerned with animation in the scene, so let me go ahead and open up a scene I've got with some animation in it. This is just the this is a sample that ships with Gamebryo. It's the Destroyer, or the Cyber Monkey, sorry, and I've attached a particle system to his tail so that we can see what this is going to do. So let's go ahead. Again, because there's a full character in this scene, it's going to take a little bit longer to push across, so we might have to wait a little bit while it exports the entire character over to our remote viewer. And there we go. So we've got our Cyber Monkey, and he's got a particle system attached to his tail right now. So let me pull up these options and show you. These first two are mode once and looping. This concerns specifically the animation that's showing in Maya. So if we change our playback range in here, it's going to push that across. So now it's only going to play frames 1 to 13, even though we have animation all the way out to 33. And if we pull in the beginning, we get the exact same thing, and it's just going to play the second half of the animation. And right now it's going to loop every time it reaches the end. If we set this to once, hit OK, it will play through the animation once and then freeze him there. Now the reason it's still simulating particles is we have continuous particle systems turned on. If you turn that off, it will play through the animation once and then stop simulating particles. And if you want to watch the animation again, all you have to do is make any change over here, and as soon as you do, it's going to play through it again. So every time you make a change, it's going to start the animation over, play through it once, and then stop. So if we want to see this looping and continuously emitting particles, we can turn both of those back on. One instance, so you might want to turn continuous particle systems off sometimes. If you do that, you'll notice every time it loops back, the particle system starts over from fresh. It begins with no particles in the scene and then begins emitting particles. So if you have like an explosion effect or something that does have keyframes, you'll want that turned off. Otherwise, for a continuously going particle system like a tail on fire, you could leave that on.